Okay, I want to go ahead and get us started. Welcome, good evening. We are so glad that you have joined us for this panel webcast on caring for siblings who have a brother or a sister with a disability. My name is Ashley Belknap. I am the Director of Engaging Disability with the Gospel. We're so glad that you're here tonight. I'm just going to take a few short minutes to tell you just briefly about what we do here in the ministry, and then the rest of the time we're going to get to know these panelists because that is who you're here to meet tonight, I'm sure. Engaging Disability is a ministry that serves our 1,900 plus PCA churches. We are the Denominational Disability Ministry for the PCA. We serve churches, families, and individuals with disabilities, kids, teens, and adults all across every stage of life, nursery, really birth through death, nursery, children's ministry, youth ministry, young adult, men's and women's ministry, seniors ministry. So a lot of times folks may think that we primarily serve children. We love our children, but we do serve much more broadly than you may think. I often throw out the examples that we serve in ways behind the scenes with mental health concerns, chronic illness, dementia, geriatric impairments, and more invisible disabilities, which we'll kind of talk about in a moment, which means that disabilities that you may not notice as you're walking up and meeting someone for the first time. So learning disabilities would certainly qualify as one of those, and there are many others. So we want to welcome any of our friends who are joining us tonight, or families that are impacted by disability. We love you. We are so glad you're here, and we hope that you'll find this conversation encouraging. We're going to send you a few links. If you're joining us on Facebook, we'll drop these links in the notes in the comments on Facebook, but we want you to know that we offer consults. They are completely free for your church, for your family. We do online trainings, we do in-person trainings, we do disability ministry leader meetings, we have free resources, we have an online store. You need to get to know us if you don't know us. There's a lot more to Engaging Disability than what we'll be able to cover tonight. So check out these links, visit our website, and connect with us more if you like what you hear tonight. And without further ado, I'm going to shift gears and start introducing this panel to you. These three panelists are three friends in real life that I have known in various places and seasons, and it is such a delight to bring them all together tonight to talk about their role as a sibling growing up and having a brother or sister with a disability. So panelists, I'm really glad that you're here, and I'm really excited for everybody to get to know you. I'm going to do just a very brief intro here. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and share the things that they want to share with you about themselves and about their siblings in a few minutes. But for now, to say, just so you can kind of connect them to a region of the country, we have Sarah, who is from Covenant Presbyterian Church in Birmingham, Alabama. We have Fred, who is from Fourth Presbyterian Church in Bethesda, Maryland. And we have Lisa, who is from Covenant Pres in Harrisonburg, Virginia. So I do want you to connect with them. I know there's going to be a lot that you will enjoy as they share their story in a few minutes. Big picture, what are we going to do tonight? What are our goals? The reason that I wanted to craft a webcast conversation around caring for siblings is because it's one of those topics that doesn't get a lot of attention. And yet in most families, there are more than one child. And a lot of times those other siblings don't have disabilities. And so one of the concerns that's always on the hearts of parents when we talk to them is, what can we do to make sure that our siblings are equipped, encouraged, loved, cared for in the right ways? And then when we talk to churches, it's the same question. What does it look like to be intentional with the siblings and not just the child, the teen or young adult or adult who has a disability? So I wanted to bring in two young adults who would be able to share a lot, and Lisa is also going to do this as well, but the two young adults who will share a lot from elementary years, middle school, high school years, and a little bit on the young adult years too. And then Lisa is going to share all of those things, and then she's also going to share a little bit about what it looks like to care for a sibling in the adult years. one thing that I wanted to share just candidly up front is that I did choose panelists tonight who have siblings with a visible disability. And I know a lot of our viewers may have children or maybe caregivers for someone who has an invisible disability. There may be people joining us tonight who have a sibling or have a child with autism or learning disability, or just things, again, that are not easily visible or noticeable at first conversation with someone or their family. And so I want those families to know that I see you and I love you and I'm so glad you're here and you're going to love this conversation. And I also want to encourage you that I'm going to do a part 2 to this, where I bring in siblings who can have the same conversation with maybe a little bit different application in some places to some of the concerns that are unique to siblings who have a brother or sister, where once you get to know the family, you notice things are maybe unfolding in different ways, but maybe you don't see that from first encounter. So to those families, I want you here tonight, and to all our families, I want to encourage you to drop questions in the chat feature or on Facebook. You can drop them in the comments. If we run out of time, I will make sure that I get those questions answered via email follow-up. So please make sure that you leave those. We had some questions that were pre-submitted, and I have enfolded a good number of those into the conversation tonight. For the ones that I don't enfold into the conversation, we will either answer them live at the end, or if there's not time, I'll reach out to you via email. Once again, we're glad you're here, and I am going to turn our conversation over to these panelists. So panelists, welcome. Thanks again for being here. And I'd love for you guys to start by introducing yourself briefly, share who you are, and then maybe a little bit about your sibling and your relationship with him or her. And Sarah, would you start us off?
Thanks, Ashley. I'm Sarah Edwards. As Ashley said, I live in Birmingham, Alabama, and grew up in Jackson, Mississippi, where Ashley and I got to meet. My older sister is Emily, and younger sister Caroline has Down syndrome, and Caroline is 28 and is a joy in our family. I have my husband William and I have 2 little girls, and love their Aunt Caroline, and so that's been fun to see their relationship unfold. But I work part-time in Birmingham, actually, for my dad, and so that keeps us busy, but it's a lot of fun. So thanks, Ashley.
Thank you. Fred.
Hi, my name's Fred Hubock. I live in Washington, D.C. with my wife and my daughter, Caroline. And I grew up in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, with one younger brother, whose name is Tim, who has Down syndrome. And Tim is 29 now. And he still lives at home with my parents, but we get to see him fairly often since we're only a couple hours away. And so he's still kind of definitely a centerpiece in our life right now.
Perfect. And while we want all of the conversation to be Fred here, I did want to make the connection that he is the son of our former director, our first founding director of this ministry, Saith Hubock. And we're so glad that we have the Hubocks in our lives. And so Fred, thanks for joining us tonight. And Lisa, will you introduce yourself?
I'm Lisa Updike. I'm the Director of Children's Ministries at Covenant Presbyterian in Harrisonburg. I have 4 adult children, 3 of whom came to us through adoption. And then I have 2 brothers, both of them younger. My brother, who is 2 years younger than I, has profound disabilities and functions as an infant. And then I have a brother that is 12 years younger. My parents wanted more children, but frankly were frightened and didn't know what the future would hold. I'm 56, so you need to realize that I was 10 years old when Public Law 94-142 was passed. And I kind of thought my parents were the movers and shakers of getting the rights for children who had disabilities. So I grew up kind of in a different time when we, for 8 of my brothers, 2 years younger, so 8 years, we were fighting and pushing that he could be recognized and part of the community. Most people kept siblings, like my brother, they either had them in homes, institutions, or locked in the home and never took them out. So very different world back then.
Very different world, and one that I'm so glad to have the perspectives for all of our panelists, but I think you're going to really enjoy seeing the differences and the similarities and just how far we've come in a lot of things as Lisa shares some of her stories. So I hope that's encouraging to our viewers as well. Okay, guys, it's time to dive in. So the place that I want to start this conversation is a little bit of a discussion about diagnoses from a kid's perspective. So I've asked our panelists to go back in time and to think about life as a little kid and whether they can remember when they first realized there was a difference between them and their sibling. And how did they process that? How did they, as a kid, how did you feel? Or what do you remember about any conversations around that time? And I'm going to toss it to Lisa first.
I was 2 when my brother was born, and I don't remember knowing anything different. It was my sense of normal. That was just the way it was. So my parents never had to do any big explanation. I mean, my adult brother functions as an infant. So he was born and he just never really developed. And so it was pretty obvious.
Perfect. Let's see, who am I calling next? Fred.
Yeah, I definitely remember when I was younger knowing that there was something different. When my brother was originally, first born, he had a lot of health issues, and that created a lot of kind of instability in the first couple months that he was born. And so I definitely remember that, not knowing why it was happening, but just knowing that something was happening. And then as I got older, I remember becoming very aware that like there was something different, but it wasn't necessarily in a bad way. It was just kind of, I only had one sibling, and it was kind of everything that I knew. So in my younger years, my relationship with my brother was more one of, I knew he was different, but it was more that I was kind of maybe even overly protective of that. So it wasn't something I was ashamed of, but it was something that I was almost more defensive against, especially with other little kids. Elementary school is a tough time to be different. So that was kind of the predominant theme that I remember.
Perfect. And Sarah, what about you?
Yeah, so I was about 4 when Caroline was born, and so similar to Fred and Lisa, don't really remember childhood without her in a lot of ways, and I was really introduced to the disability world with physical therapists coming to our home, early intervention, and kind of learning about it that way. So it was just a very, even though my older sister and I were developing typically, it was quickly a part of kind of our family identity. And my parents were really great, kind of teaching rally around each other, and that we were a team to support Caroline.
That's awesome. So one of the reasons that I asked this question first was parents, I think, worry a lot about how do we really talk to our other kids about disability, or what do they understand, what do they not when they're little. And one of the common themes in all 3 of these panelists is just that this was our family, just like any other family would say. This is our family. This is who we are. This is how we grew up. And I have asked them each to, I should have said this in the preface, not just share all of the easy things as well, but also to really think back and to share some of the things that were challenging or that they overcame, because I think those are the sticky points, again, where parents start to worry. And it's nice to hear reflection back on those and kind of what it felt like to grow up through it. So in keeping with the same theme, biggest question that I get asked in the elementary years is this: how should I tell my other children that their sibling has a disability? And what thoughts or advice can you give parents? So I'm going to start this round with Fred.
For me, I think it really just boils down to being direct and honest. Kids will are pretty sharp, when they're younger, and they'll figure it out that something's different. So I think it's really important for parents to kind of get in front of that and frame it, especially if you think about coming from a Christian perspective and talking about, that we all have struggles and we all have differences, and that, your sibling has this one very visible particular difference. And I think it's important to just say that and just acknowledge it for what it is, and acknowledge that like it will create challenges, because, the reality is it's really tough. It's really tough to be a parent of a child with disability. And I think that the sooner that like the family acknowledges that and kind of like buys into like, this is going to be different and it's going to be hard, but we're going to do it together. I think that the sooner that happens, probably at least in my personal experience, the better that it will be.
Perfect. Sarah, what can you add?
Yeah, I totally agree with Fred. I feel like, as soon as you as a parent have had some time to process it and feel ready to tell your children, whether it's, during, anatomy scan during pregnancy, or, it's at some point during your child's early years. I think just to talk to them and, like you said, be frank and be honest. Obviously, you don't want to give every detail, but I think also if you, if there are other families that that have children with disabilities, maybe you can reference them and help them see some of the kids you can, because it is a tight-knit community in the disability world, and that's a special thing. So they can, you don't have to go it alone.
Right. Lisa, what can you add?
The other thing is, as we're framing this for our children, we're teaching them to frame it for their friends, for their classmates, and for their children in the future too. So as a director of children's ministries, I love teaching the children's catechism to our kids. Who made you? God. What else did God make? God made all things. And why did God make you in all things? For his own glory. So as you look at your family, you can say, sweetheart, God made you for his own glory with that great big smile and all the things we love about you. And he made your brother or sister for his own glory. And we don't always understand how or why, but we know God is good and we know he will be glorified. And we are a part of that story. And to teach our children to raise their vision higher than the suffering and the hardship is really important. We acknowledge the hardship, but we say it's for God's glory, and this is good.
That's great. And for our families that are watching tonight, I just want to pull the themes out and remind you what you know. No two families are the same. No two disabilities are the same. Even, we have two tonight who represent the Down syndrome world, and their siblings are very different from each other, and as are all the others that are represented in that community, and on it goes. And so I just want to encourage you as a family to, as Fred and Sarah both said, as you're kind of finding your own and you're really getting to that place where you're processing this their new normal and you're finding your own language as a parent to describe that to others. Don't forget to help your children have words to describe that to their friends as well. And that will look different according to whether you have girls or boys, or whether you're, whatever context you have and however old they are. But I think it's important to make sure that they always feel equipped to engage and talk with confidence. Some won't need any help, some might need more help. And there's no right or wrong way to go about it. You may be a family who's more private. You may not want to share as much. You may be a family who shares a lot. That either way and in between, we're doing a wonderful job. I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to do it right. But I think what you're going to hear over and over in these themes is there isn't one right way. And leaning on the Lord and remembering that our family is here to glorify God, as Lisa said, is really what it's all about, and kind of finding your rhythm in that you can be confident and just be the unique family that you are. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to kind of transition them into the elementary school years, and then we'll do middle and high school, because I just want you to hear how things change over time. So first elementary school question. Will each of you describe just a little bit of life as an elementary kid? What do you remember about how disability impacted the family and you during that season of life? And I would love to particularly hear any of the thoughts you have on maybe going to lots of therapy sessions, or your friends' reactions to your siblings, or any other specific things that stand out in those elementary years. And I'm going to toss it to Sarah first this time.
Yeah. I think I definitely have a lot of memories of, doing reading and homework in the waiting room at therapy, and, driving to, a new place to, try something new, or, I think, and as, a young elementary child, it was all just very normal. I didn't really, realize that wasn't what every family was doing. It was just kind of the way it was. And that was, that was fine, and that it was not a big deal. I think when I was a little bit younger, I remember kind of processing it, and just learning about different disabilities and different things. Having I had a doll, and kind of mimicking what was going on with Caroline. I decided that he had a disability. He had cerebral palsy, and I helped him, learning to walk, and but not being able to say it. And so I said that he had cerebral palsy, and so just some of those things of a little child kind of taking it all in and processing and figuring out, what it looks like and means. And but in so many ways, it's just it was just part of our norm. And the Lord was really gracious, and the friendships and community, and that I really don't remember mean-spirited conversations or questions. And even if there were some, I was either just naive to it, or I really don't have any painful memories of that. And I'm really grateful that in a lot of ways, Carolyn was very accepted. And there may have been things that my parents shielded me from, as far as hard conversations that they had to have with community and friends. But I think she was just a sweet child, and so it was easy in a lot of ways for her to kind of blend in. And but that's a lot of the memories. It's just kind of part of normal life in so many ways.
I love that. I especially love that you remember having a doll and letting natural play. We talk about that a lot in this ministry, that the way kids process things is through play. That's where either stress or just figuring out life happens. And so I love that example, because it really does just show how a normal part it was. Lisa, I'm gonna toss to you next.
Okay. Well, I was known as the kid, who had that brother, that big baby as a brother. And back in the day, they didn't have wheelchairs that were specially designed. So we had like just a regular wheelchair that didn't fit my brother's body, and had to make harnesses and tie them all together. When we went to amusement parks or something, we pulled him in a wagon, which wasn't done back then. It was just wherever we went, we were a show. And we were going to get stares and whispers, sometimes questions and sometimes criticism, like, why would you bring him out here for us to have to see? But I remember feeling really proud, because despite all of that, he was our family. We were family, and we weren't going to be held back. So I just remember that sense of, yeah, this is us, My younger brother, James, had a little bit of a different experience. Like, I'm the big sister, so I'm supposed to defend my little brother. But James is the little brother, and he's supposed to be able to look up to his big brother. And so it was an interesting dynamic for him. The kids in our neighborhood, at that point, I was off at college, and James was this little kid, and they teased him ruthlessly. They used words like retard and That hurts. And at the special school my brother went to, they had the very special Olympics where every kid got some kind of award. And so like my brother John got the award for holding his head up for 20 seconds, and they had the little plastic gold medals. Well, my brother James, what is more special than the Olympics? The very special Olympics, right? And so he went out in the neighborhood riding his bicycle, wearing my brother's medals, saying, I'm training for the Special Olympics, with pride in his big brother. And, just to have the kids in the neighborhood just tease him. And, I said to my brother, like, I didn't know that was going on. I want to go back and pop those kids in the nose. But, James said to me, oh, no, I feel so badly for them that they didn't get it and that they missed out on seeing how special John was. I'm like, oh, you're godly. James is godly. I just still want to pop the kids in the nose. But anyway, so we have two different perspectives there.
And Lisa, I'm going to toss this back live because I know you won't mind, but can you say maybe like a sentence or two on parents' role in helping us know, like, this is our family and this is what we do, and or did they influence you and your brother at all in how you viewed, protective, or excited about those little milestones? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, my parents did a great job in delighting in all of our milestones. James also, I'm sure he wouldn't mind you knowing, my brother James has learning disabilities. So, he had that too. So as he learned to read, that was phenomenal. And as my brother John was able to eat in taking less than an hour for a meal, wow. And so there's just a attitude of thankfulness that had to be chosen, because it's really easy to become discouraged. And my parents said, no, we're going to choose thankfulness.
I just want to just kind of bring that back up, because I do think it's important for parents to remember that you are helping everybody process everything. And, elementary years, as you're going to hear in all of these, that's not really an introspective time. You're just kind of doing the next thing and you're figuring out life. And so a lot of that rock stability does come from how the parents respond. And so I appreciate that, Lisa.
And just one other thing, just mom and dad need to be a safe place to cry and to complain about some of the hurt. Now, mom and dad can then reframe it. They can pray, but you need a place that you can say, gosh, this really stinks. And they need to be that safe place. I'm blessed that mom and dad were that.
It's really good to point out. I see, but everybody shaking our heads on just knowing that you can be you and kind of let your hair down at home. I think that's such an important part in the elementary years, that you're loved for you and you can process you in the midst of us, right? Even if us doesn't always make sense, it's a safe place to do that processing. Fred, I want to toss the same question. I kind of got us off, but back to the elementary question, tossing it to you.
Yeah, I definitely agreed with Lisa. Like, elementary school was definitely the first time when we as a family had to start just wrestling with like some of the pain of like seeing Tim not always be accepted or not necessarily understood, and sometimes unintentionally excluded, sometimes intentionally excluded, and that was hard. And I think when we talk about like being honest, like candidly, like elementary school was just really, really hard. Like, it was just really hard. And not necessarily for that reason. In my opinion, it was really just defined by like chaos and conflict, just because like it was like, it was essentially like Tim was a toddler for 5 years, like it was just this kind of constant, just like moving from one crisis to the next, and there's stories now that like we look back on them and we laugh, but like in the moment, like they were not funny, in the moment you were like, everyone was ready to just like pull their hair out and be like, I can't do another 20 minutes, let alone another 20 years, So I think that, at least for me, it's really important just to say that, because I'm sure there are lots of families that feel that way right now. And just knowing that, like, that's just a tough place to be, and for our family, elementary school was that time when it was tough.
And what I appreciate
Can I
about
can I ask a question?
go for it.
Did you guys struggle with just the fact that you couldn't be spontaneous? Like, I know for us, everything took 10 times more planning. And like my friends would be like, oh, our family is going to meet down at the ice cream shop. And we'd be like, we'll be there in an hour, just because everything took so much planning. Was that hard for you guys?
Fred, what would you say?
Oh yeah, definitely. That was really challenging. And it was just one of those things that kind of, we just learned to accept, but there were definitely times where that was really tough, especially as when I was a younger kid, to kind of understand that and like accept that. That was hard.
Yeah, I don't remember that being a big thing, but it may have, I may have just kind of pushed past it. And I remember there were definitely, trips that people were going on and different things that were, not as easy for our family. And I feel like my parents did a really good job of reframing the things that we could do and that we could do as a family, and that worked with our pace. But I definitely remember, conversations about, the difference in what worked for our family versus other families. Absolutely.
I think one of the fun things here is we have two firstborns. That would be Fred and Lisa. You're the oldest.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah's the middle child, right?
Yeah.
So even here, I want parents to remember there are differences even in birth order and personality and just how you experience things. It could be if we got Sarah's older sister, I have no idea, but it could be even if you talk about the same things, that different things come out based on how old you are at the time and what you remember. I appreciate in the elementary years that there isn't a lot of introspection, just to bring that back. But what I really love about Fred is just the honesty that it's okay to say those were really hard, long years. And I think even in that, watching God really cultivate good from really hard. I experienced that as a mom with 3 unique little boys, that, being able to say they're long, hard seasons, and you don't always just have to smile and say it's all together and it's all good. So Fred, I really appreciate that. And Lisa, I love your question. Okay, let me ask the next one here. Parents often feel a tremendous amount of guilt about the reality that the family has to bend to the needs of the sibling with a disability. So what encouragement and tips can you guys give parents about dividing their attention or their perspective, or saying no to other things that families might appear to be doing? How would you encourage the guilt that they may feel? Oh, and who am I going to ask first? Let's see. On this one, Fred, I think I'm coming back to you.
I understand the concept of parents feeling the guilt, but I think it's one of those things where I think the sooner that you accept it as a family, like the happier you'll be, because it is just the reality that, child with a disability takes a lot more time and energy, and it can't always just be distributed evenly, And so I think it's okay, at least for me, my perspective is that, it's okay to just acknowledge it and call it what it is and say that, like, this is hard. But I think especially for young kids, it was always really helpful when my parents like affirmed the fact that, like, they acknowledged that, like, hey, this is different, or like, we need to do this thing right now. And like, I know it's not fun, but it doesn't mean that, like, I love you less, or, that I don't want to spend time with you. Right. Like, so I think, especially for young kids, just like the more that you can verbalize that and just like affirm them and say, like, you didn't do anything wrong. Like, it's not, and just the more you can affirm them, probably the better that, the easier it will be for them to accept what's going on.
I love that. Sarah, what would you add?
Yeah, I think, what Fred said is great. And I think one thing that was so helpful in our family was, as I mentioned a second ago, I feel like my parents were really good at looking for things that we could all do together that wasn't necessarily, it wasn't necessarily talked about that, well, we're doing this because it works for Caroline too, but it was stuff that we could all enjoy and all participate in, I know there's some like wonderful family camps and different things. And yeah, I know that's not, certain things don't work for every family, but if there are things that, whether it's, a simple activity or that can be something that everybody enjoys and can take part in, I think that's a really special way to spend time as a family, and to help kind of draw out some family unity where everybody can really feel like a participant, or like that they get to be as a group and not just focused on a specific sibling.
Can you think of any examples of like one activity that y'all all did that you remember being very fun, just to give creative thoughts?
Yes. Yeah. I know so when we, had the opportunity to do vacations as a family, Caroline loves the water. And so the beach was huge, or even, going to like neighborhood pool was always fun. And she's still, loves to swim and that kind of thing. And so that was always something that was really a great family activity, was spending time at the pool.
I think it's a great win when you can find interests that are largely applicative to everybody. I know there will be parents out there that are thinking that that's really hard,
right,
to do, but I do think, especially in the elementary years, my encouragement is to find those passions and find ways to stick some of those passions into the activities you do together. They really do create those memories of everybody doing it together and nobody being left behind. At the same time, it's also good to have times where you're doing things just for you. So I appreciate that, Sarah. Let's see. How about, let's see. I get lost listening.
Yes.
Lisa. Sorry, I should know that I'm coming to you.
I would encourage parents to remember that God uses all kinds of things to shape us. Birth order, you mentioned that, where we live, our church, and our siblings, whether they're typically developing or special needs. God uses all kinds of things to shape us. And so I look back on my childhood, the good and the hard, and I shouldn't say good and hard, because hard is not bad. It's just hard, right? But the easy times, the sweet memories, the suffering times, God used all of those things. And James and I were just talking about this, and we learned that the world does not revolve around me. I think that's a good lesson. We learned that everyone suffers, and we learned that even in hardship, there's joy. And we got to learn that younger than a lot of people. Everybody needs to learn those things. So God just taught us younger. So I just want to encourage, I know my parents would often say, like, you're going to have to take care of John. If he outlives us, you're going to have to take, oh, we're so sorry. I'm like, we've learned all along that God has given him as a gift to us. So let's not change that narrative now. Now, of course, I couldn't say that as a child, but as an adult, I can look at them and say, don't change that narrative. God is a gift. If he was a gift John is a gift to us. If he was a gift when he was 2, he's a gift now that he's about to turn 54.
I love that. And I think the only thing I want to add here, just for all the families who may feel like they live at therapy sessions and, just aren't doing what everyone else is doing. My one tip and encouragement is that a lot of times I hear parents maybe holding back why everybody's at therapy together, or, what we're working on there, those skills or what needs to be done. And one of the small joys that I have seen as we rally around one who may have to go to do therapy for a certain extended period of time is that when you share what we're learning, you can share in the victories and the small successes. And so even those things, when you share goals and you share the process, it can become really delightful when siblings cheer each other on.
Mm-hmm.
So don't hide the hard, right? Don't hide the missing skills always to protect. Let them be part of the process. Give them a chance to serve and cheer and encourage when appropriate. It won't be appropriate all the time. It shouldn't be overdone, but along the way, every now and then, it might surprise you how God uses that to develop the character of your other kids.
Can I
Okay.
say one more thing?
Yes.
I have often said to my children that when we're going through hardship as a family, the family gets the front row seat to see what God will do. So your children that are neurotypical, they get a front row seat to watch God move in your family in the child with special needs. And that is a really great honor. And you want to let them know what a joy that can be.
I love that. So very well said. Okay, my next question on parenting in the elementary years kind of goes to this reality that sometimes there are two very different sets of rules or expectations present for typically developing kids versus their sibling with special needs. What encouragement or advice, or maybe even perspective, can you give to parents? This is another place where guilt can come in, where they maybe feel like there's two standards, or again, two sets of rules and outcomes to that. So what encouragement can you offer? And Fred, I'm going to toss this one to you.
Sure. I really struggled with this concept as a kid. I had this kind of sense of like justice in my mind of like, things should be equal and things should be fair. And so like my brother has certain expectations or consequences for behavior, and I have certain expectations and consequences. And when they were different, I really wrestled with that. And I think it was probably more evident as well, just because there were only two of us. So it was very kind of black and white of like, just the way that sometimes, especially when it came to like discipline as a young kid, like that was really hard for me to kind of swallow. And I was really kind of resentful about that when I was younger. And it wasn't until I was older that I kind of had a different perspective on it. Because when I was really young, the narrative was, things aren't fair for me, but as I got older, I started to see the way that, life was more challenging or maybe unfair to my brother. And just in the way that, as I became older, he started asking questions like, when I started driving, like, well, why can't I drive? Or when I went to college, like, why am I not going to college? Or when I got married and moved out of the house, like, why am I still living here? And so I don't know that I have a lot of advice around that, but just the perspective that like there's a different time and season that each sibling or family member will struggle with a different thing, and just because in the moment it feels like something isn't fair or someone's getting the short end of the stick, like it can very easily change later on in life. And having walked through that gave me a new appreciation for it, and kind of more empathy for my brother in the way that the rules are different for him than I had when I was younger.
When Fred and I were talking through this and kind of planning out things, one of the things I really appreciated was how you described the elementary years, that it was hard for you, and then in the middle and high school years it kind of flipped, and that the two sets of rules, it became more hard on your brother, because you got more freedoms and got more independence. And so that season, I really appreciate this season perspective there, in that we each have to grow and learn in those seasons. I too have my oldest is very much a rule follower and justice driven. And I think for parents out there that have kids with those personalities, it's a great place to teach how God works with us, and that if everything was one for one, that would not be the God we wanted to serve. And it really cultivates a place where God gets to work in their heart to show grace when it's really hard and they really want the rule to be followed, and maybe it can't be. But I'm looking forward. I'm not to the place where the seasons might change, so I'm looking forward to what may happen in the middle high school years. Ladies, do y'all have any thoughts to add there before I ask the next question? Okay. All right. So the next question, I am going to go to creative tips for caring for and encouraging siblings in elementary years. And I'm going to do this in two categories. So first, what are your creative tips that you might give for really caring for and loving the siblings? What tips would you give to the parents? And then we're going to talk about the children's ministry workers. So y'all got any really good how to love on your other kids? And let me start with Sarah on this.
Yeah, actually, I thought what you said about really like celebrating milestones with the sibling with disability was great. And I think anytime you can, just catch little good things that your other children are doing, whether it's, being helping around the house really well, or something they did great at school, or just noticing small things. It's not necessarily creative, but it can be easy to miss in the, chaos of day to day. And so I think anytime you can take a moment to catch those and cheer them on, just so they know that you notice. And that's a huge thing that you can do for your other children.
That's great. Lisa, what about you?
Because mom needed to stay at home and John wasn't very portable, most of the errands, grocery shopping and all that kind of stuff were done by dad and me. He didn't run an errand that he didn't grab me and later my brother James, so that he would use that purposefully for special time. And so grocery shopping, I had a job every week. I picked out the special treat to bring home, whether it was a kind of cookie or ice cream or whatever. My job was to find that special thing. We had certain songs we sang in the car, and it was like a date night, and we were just going to the grocery store, So I think because life is so busy, and then you have a child with special needs, we need to build those moments into our regular routine. Otherwise, they're not going to happen. So whether it's that bedtime moment, or errands, or the moment before a child goes to school, to be very purposeful about making some kind of connection, I think can be really helpful.
So good. That's so good. I think none of us have extra time when you have special needs kids. So finding those things you're already doing, perfect and brilliant. Fred, what would you add?
Just to reiterate, I think what Sarah said, I think you just can't affirm your kids enough, especially in the middle of kind of the chaos that comes with, raising a child with special needs. So it's probably just a very easy thing to forget to do, just because I think it's easy for a parent to say, like, my typical kid is on track, so I don't need to worry about them right now. But I would just say, take every opportunity you can to just, encourage them and let them know that, you're proud of them and love them.
And I'll do a quick twist on this too. On the flip side of celebrating all the small things that have come really hard to our kids with disabilities, it's easy to not celebrate the things that come really easy to the other kids, right? So I think what you're hearing here from Fred and Sarah is that just the importance of knowing that I'm known, and that I'm known for me, and I'm celebrated for me, and that my accomplishments, and whether they're big or small, are noticed by you, even if you're super busy. So just to encourage parents again, if you're celebrating the baby milestones, don't forget to celebrate all the things for the others as well. It doesn't have to be spectacular, but those words well spoken go a long way to the heart. Okay, so our next question kind of takes us to children's ministry workers. So what would you tell children's ministry people? Put yourself back in children's ministry. Fred, Sarah has asked you this, and Lisa's going to probably wear her children's ministry hat too, but also think of it back when you were in children's ministry. What do you wish children's ministry people had known? And let's see, I'm going to Lisa first.
I just want to encourage those children's ministries people out there, make sure you see all of the children in a family. It's so easy to make sure you're providing for the child with special needs, and that's very important, but see the other children and their needs as well. Is the child with special needs in the hospital again? Yes, send a card, but send a card to the child who's still at home, who's scared and wondering what's going to happen this time. Make sure, sometimes transportation is a big issue. And so the kids get left out of things because they can't take the whole family out again. Provide transportation, find people who are willing to do that. If people know the need, they usually are very willing to step up and do that. And we have special buddies for our kids with special needs, but what if you had somebody, it doesn't have to be known, but is a special buddy to the other kids in the family, just making sure that they get heard, that, mom and dad are so busy gathering all the things after Sunday school for the child who has special needs. Maybe you've got somebody who comes alongside that family and gathers the other kids from Sunday schools, make sure they have their papers and their crafts and present those to mom and dad so they're not left behind, and all of the things they've learned not communicated with mom and dad.
Love that. Fred, what would you add?
I would just say from my personal perspective, people at church or just in other spheres, like they were still trying to figure out how to interact with my younger brother, and they didn't always quite know what the answer was. And so just my advice to anyone in that situation is that like the other sibling is not the person that like you need to refer to like figure that out. Like that's the parent. And it's just really easy to default that way because they're comfortable, they kind of know what's going on, but like that's just not really a fair world place to put them in. It's just not their responsibility. So just kind of delineating that, especially, and it's very challenging when there's not a big age gap, I think. But just delineating that and saying, that's not their responsibility, that's the parents. And so just keeping that off their plate.
That's so good. And we also see that in small churches where we have everybody together in one group, or we have perhaps an older, could be older girl or boy sibling, but a lot of our older girls can kind of take on a caregiving role because they're just good at it, and kind of become that buddy, when it really is a great place for kids to get to unwind and be them for them in children's ministry and get ministered to as even a little respite from home. So for our children's ministry people listening in, don't forget that point. I think that's so well said, Fred. Sarah, what would you add?
Yeah, I love everything y'all said. I think the only other thing that I thought of was just don't forget to ask the siblings about themselves and get to know them as an individual. That obviously our siblings with disability are a huge part of our lives and who we are, and that's a wonderful thing. But I guess, in seasons where there are, maybe that sibling is, having procedures or stuff, don't forget to also ask about that sibling and how they're doing, and maybe something that's going on with them at school or just the other parts of their life too, because I think that's a great way to make them really feel acknowledged as the individual. And, but I mean, just like you said, Lisa, that, their sibling is a huge part of their life, and that, there can be things that weigh on them that their peers aren't having to think about. So
good. Okay, I'm going to transition us to middle school. So in the middle school years, you become a little bit more self-conscious and a little bit more introspective. So as that change happens, this is kind of the stage where siblings maybe have also grown up a little bit and are not your small babies, toddlers, preschoolers. Every preschooler, toddler baby is adorable. But as you grow into elementary years, there can be lots more behaviors that are associated with it. And now you're chasing around an 8-9-year-old, or I think about our families that have elopers. It's one thing when a 3-year-old elopes. It's another thing when you can't find a 9-year-old. So I think that the stresses change, especially if right here we all have these are older siblings reflecting on a younger sibling with a disability, but I want to hear them talk just a little bit about what you remember your middle school years looking like and how your sibling maybe had changed, or how you had changed, how your parents had changed, how friends' reactions had changed. Anything in there that would be applicable to your story and that you could share for encouragement to our parents that are watching. And Lisa, I'll start with you.
John, because his handicaps are so profound, he became in a way more absent, because I was then in middle school, in my own school. He was still at the elementary school where the special needs program was. And so it was this weird disconnect that nobody really knew my brother anymore. So yeah, middle school was miserable just for middle schoolness, but not so much with my brother. It's almost like a vacuum of memories there for me.
That's good. Fred, what about you?
Yeah, for me, I mean, the way I remember it is kind of the trajectory of Tim's kind of growth and development was elementary was really kind of chaotic. Like middle school was kind of this transition period. And then high school, he really just like hit his stride and kind of like, I felt like really flourished and kind of grew into, you know, himself as an individual. And, but middle school was really challenging because especially from a behavioral standpoint, because that was like the last kind of like line in the sand that had to be drawn where like, it was really easy to just feel like it was like running a marathon. It was just like as a family, it was really easy to feel like maybe we'll just like let this thing slide because like I'm so tired of like, like you're trying to like hold a certain standard of behavior, and so like that was really challenging, I think, more for my parents than for me. But I think that's probably one of the best things they did because it created the foundation then for him to really be successful in high school, I think, because they really rooted out a lot of those behavioral things that you could have kind of just let slide and then probably would have reemerged later on in life. So I guess my encouragement to parents would be like, don't give up, right? Like you're so close when you're in middle school, just like power through it. And I think it really create it for our family. It really created a good foundation for us all to kind of grow into going forward.
And I'm wearing the parent hat amongst these folks. They're all parents, but I'm the one with the parent with the kids with disabilities tonight. So I appreciate especially that comment and encouragement. I think it can be really hard to see where you're headed when you're in it, right? And when the days are long and the bandwidth gets shorter because you've done it, like you've addressed things 50,000 times or so I appreciate the encouragement there to keep on keeping on, because it is important for parents not to lose their in the middle years, these middle school years. Sarah, what can you add?
Yeah, I think memories of that season were kind of some of the, Fred, you described a little bit of a change in things and in your family. And for us, in some ways, it was kind of time spent. And I feel like that was a season where Emily, our older sister, went to college at the kind of end of middle school, beginning of high school for me. And we would often, take trips on the weekend to go visit her, and which was so much fun. But it was Carolyn kind of started to make some sacrifices because that was, hard, long days for her, and she does not love football or loud noises and that kind of thing. And so I really kind of started to see some of those. In some ways, the natural give and take of a family where, it was a great opportunity for us to spend time with Emily and see her world. But it was a little bit harder on parents to have, and parents do sacrifice for them. But that was kind of one of those seasons where she kind of started to give in different areas.
That's so good. And my next question is going to be high school, but I don't want everybody to think, oh, you just through middle school. But I want them to talk about high school, and then we're going to talk a little bit about youth group and kind of how encouragement there, because it's a whole different scene and story as you navigate youth ministry. But I want them to think about high school first, kind of frame this whole thing. These teenage years kind of all blur together. So on high school, this is the time where you guys were learning to drive, beginning to make decisions about college. You had lots of outside interests. You had busy schedules. You had more independence. So how was family life different during the high school years for you? And then did you notice any changes in your siblings because of those independence, especially for Fred and Sarah? Lisa's going to have a little bit of a different story here. But did y'all notice any difference in your siblings on this season? And Lisa, I'm going to give you first. I'm sorry, Fred, I'm going to give you first go on this one.
Yeah, kind of like I mentioned earlier, high school, I think, was when, Tim really kind of hit his stride as an individual. And, a lot of his peers had grown up and they were a lot more mature. And so it was like there wasn't this issue of like being excluded or like being made fun of. It was more like people would look forward to when Tim came around. Like it was just like, it was candidly probably one of the most positive times like for our family. And I think because of that, like it kind of there was kind of like this big sigh of relief of like, oh, okay, like we kind of like might have made it, and so really it was just a lot of positive memories. And, I think the best things about the high school years were that there weren't a whole lot of limits kind of put on Tim. And so he kind of tried new things and did stuff that probably, if we were just like planning his life, like he wouldn't have done. And so I think that was a really important thing in the high school years, was giving him the freedom to like try things and like potentially fail, because, we didn't know what he could or couldn't do until he tried it. So that was kind of what defined high school for us.
That's so good. Love that. Sarah, what would you add?
Yeah, I think I had lots going on in high school and had lots of opportunities. And so I feel like I was just out doing stuff at school so much. And I feel like a lot of times I got to spend with Caroline was, kind of a little more intensive time with mom and dad, went to dinner or supper club or something, and I would stay home with Caroline. And I'm really so thankful for those memories, even though, I'm sure friends were out doing other things, but that I got to, stay home and watch a movie with Caroline and just kind of build that bond as we were both getting older and, gaining appropriate amounts of independence, and just to have some of those time is doing things that sisters would normally do, just, having dinner and watching a movie or listening to music together. And so it was fun to see as she, matured in certain ways to kind of continue to build that relationship in a new way.
And I remember you saying too, one thing that your older sister did for you as she got to drive, you in turn did with Caroline, taking her out.
Yes.
That's not playing somewhere else, but tell everybody a little bit about that too, because I think that's fun just to see that same themes can happen across all the siblings. We may have paused here.
So I'm the middle of girls, and we're all 4 years apart. What was that?
Sorry, you were caught back up. I think I interrupted. Keep going.
What'd you say, Ashley?
Sarah, we may have lost you a moment. I'm going to toss it to Lisa, but we'll come back to you, Sarah. So when your video catches back up, we'll catch you back. Lisa, what would you add?
Yes,
it's very, very different for us, because John was still an infant. He still didn't talk. His voice was changing. So now he was babbling in a manly voice. And we couldn't any longer just heft him up and take it. We didn't have a van with a lift. So just imagine a teenage boy in diapers and the output and taking care of that. If we were going to go to church, we're hefting him up, putting him in the car, carrying him. And so vacations, like we couldn't go on vacation with him anymore. So the really hard decision, these were the first times we started using respite care for him. And it was great to go on vacation and to have some freedom, but it just stinks to leave a family member behind. so those years, while they were sweet and my friends were so supportive, there was no longer any issue of being made fun of for any of us, little James included. But it was just hard because the difference was so profound, and we started realizing what the future would hold, that we weren't going to be able to care for him at home for the rest of his life, just physically. And that was really hard.
And I appreciate you being willing to share the heart and the tears. I mean, I know the families joining us tonight, there's some that are in those really hard places. And I think just reminding us all that grief pops back in, not just in the sharing of stories, but really in the living of it, that those intersections of life and growth and good also come with grief and loss as you discover what the next new normal is. And so I really appreciate your willingness to share that was really hard, and that is really hard. None of those are easy decisions. Okay, the next question kind of relates to just encouraging parents in the teenage years. For those who are gearing up for it, have preteens, what tips or encouragement would you share to help them navigate those teenage years well? And I'm going to ask, let's see, Lisa, I think I'm tossing back to you first.
Okay. Now I'm speaking kind of also as a church worker, that I would just encourage your children, your, now high school age children, to be able to advocate for themselves, to talk to the youth leaders, to their youth group, and tell them what their needs are. Tell them, hey, I really want you to include my special needs sibling here, or I really need time to myself. I need to be in a different small group than my sibling, or, and just as parents, come alongside them and say, it's really okay to talk about what you need. We can shepherd you, because really, I think most of us are far past really being selfish at this point. I mean, is that reasonable to say? You've grown up having to give a lot, so making your needs known doesn't necessarily, it's not a selfish thing. They need to be able to articulate that. So I would just, as a parent, really encourage your children to understand themselves more and how to relate that, because that's going to be a skill they need as an adult too.
That's so good. And I think that's part of the growing up process for everybody. I mean, some of these themes are unique to siblings with disabilities, and some of them are, the Lord doesn't teach you in one way, you will learn it in different ways. And so our particular niche is learning it through this lens. But I really appreciate that. Let's see, Fred, what could you add?
I don't think I have a whole lot to add. I think probably the biggest encouragement during that time period is just for me, what I saw with my brother was just around the whole concept of maturing and discipline and expectations, and just not giving up, right? Just when you're so close, just continuing on, just because I think I've seen different kids where they've had different approaches, and I think families that kind of got burnt out too soon ended up having different struggles later down the road with their adult children. So that's just what I would say. It's just, if you can, hang on, don't give up when you're, so close.
Sarah, what would you add?
I think everything else said is great. I don't think I have anything to.
Thanks for wrangling technology with us.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're great. We're so glad you're right here. We can hear you great. Okay, what about for youth workers? What can you guys share that they need to know in order to encourage and disciple teens who have a sibling with a disability? Fred, what are your thoughts?
I think just understanding the amount of stress sometimes that can be going on behind the scenes, and that, it's really easy for the family to kind of do some window dressing and make everything look like it's okay, or it's not as stressful as it is. And just, just understanding how hard that can be, and just that can sometimes be kind of a silent, suffering is probably too strong of a word, but a silent just challenge that may not be always evident to other people.
And that's so good. That relates to what one of you said earlier too, that, people, you siblings that are watching tonight and parents who are navigating all this, you all intensely know all the things about your families, but everyone else just gets a glimpse of who you are when you're with them in the moment. And so I think it's easy for it to come across as easy, or to make it look like it's not as hard, even to the place where, I would say there's a lot of suffering and trials and growth, hard growth in good places that's related to having a sibling with unique needs in the teenage years. So I think it is really hard to just show up and share all that. You shouldn't, and you're not going to. But for youth workers, remember that you're just seeing a slice of the pie the night or two that you're with everyone. And so there's a lot more behind the scenes that could be stress, anxiety, that could be joys and blessings. But I think that's a piece to tease out in your one-on-ones as you're getting to know these students for themselves, to kind of figure out how are they processing where they are in their family at this stage. Sarah, what would you add?
Yeah, I have two thoughts. So one from my experience is that it really wasn't until high school that I kind of started to reconcile the fact that disability is not God's plan, that there are joys and so many blessings in having a sibling with disability, but that in heaven, Caroline won't have Down syndrome. And in some ways that felt, it was hard to realize that, because it almost felt like a betrayal that I didn't love Caroline as she is, as Lord created her. There's now I feel like I have so much to look forward to. Caroline's not very verbal, and so I think about the conversations that we'll have in heaven, and getting to, she loves to sing, and getting to hear her sing, all the words, and not just things like that. And so kind of what you and Fred are both saying, that it might not be, you might think that these siblings have it all figured out, but they might be just now kind of starting to process what this, what it means, or thinking ahead to college and that kind of thing. So, and another thing briefly is Caroline and I were not in youth group at the same time, but if you do have siblings that are, both siblings are in the youth at the same time, it can be easy, I feel like, if you have a good relationship with your sibling with special needs, to kind of use them as a security blanket almost. That might seem weird, but like you said, Ashley, we kind of know our role as a sibling, and we can be protective, and it gives us a purpose. And so don't be, afraid to kind of try to draw that, both siblings out individually, and make sure you're really ministering to them as, separate people, and not, because it might, even though you might see a sibling really caring for their sibling with disability, that's a wonderful thing, but they might be uncomfortable in the situation. And so maybe see that, just think through it if you're a youth worker.
So good. Great advice and thoughts. Lisa?
Just what I said before about children, see every child, just see every child, and know how God is calling you to minister to them.
And I'll add one closing thought to the youth group years for our youth people who are watching. I think there's a tendency to put the pressure on yourself that you have to know everything about disability, or, get to a certain fluency with what is going on. And while on a ministry equipping level, I want to say, yes, that's what we're here for. That's what the ministry is here for. On a relational level, I'm going to take that away and say, you can get to know anybody simply by getting to know them the same way that you would every other kid in your youth group. And so I really want to encourage you at the point where fear or, lack of words, or thinking you don't know enough about whatever, to engage the sibling or the sibling with a disability. I think it's really important to remember you don't need to know enough to love well. That's in this ministry, that is my motto. You don't need to know enough to love well. Okay, I want to move us into the young adult years. These are fun questions. Well, I guess before I move us to the young adult years, I'm jumping ahead of myself. One question that came in, I just want to toss out for you guys if you have any thoughts on it, and that is anything you wish that your parents maybe had done a little differently. And let me preface this with, it's definitely not a question to point out anything that anyone did wrong. I'll put on the parent hat. We're doing the best we can with where we are, and we, good gracious, make 1,000 mistakes on a daily basis. And you all know that as parents too. So reflect on this from the vantage point of parents listening. What do you wish your parents had done or done more of? And Fred, I'm going to toss to you first.
Yeah, for me, it kind of comes down to this, this question or issue that, when you have a child with disability, like, your family can't always do the same things that other families do. Your vacations might look different. The way you relax might look different. And so like, there are a lot of life experiences that, I just didn't have as a kid that like maybe some of my peers did because they just weren't feasible, right? Like, we're not going to go skiing with my brother when he's 8, right? That's just like a recipe for disaster, So like just simple things like that like are just things that just don't happen as a family. And so what I would say is there were definitely times where my parents were very intentional about like trying to have experiences or doing things one-on-one, like where they kind of like pulled me aside and like we did something that we couldn't do as a whole family because they were trying to make sure that like I still got that like experience. And so for me, it would mostly just be doing that as often as you can with your kids. So not saying that it didn't happen enough, but just I don't think it can happen too much in the sense of whether it's something as simple as like going out to breakfast one-on-one before school, or something as big as like doing a small trip together, like, and everything in between. That's what I think, I really appreciated and definitely would encourage other parents to do if they're able.
And I'll encourage parents in the midst of parenting, your kids aren't going to tell you maybe they will tell you what they wish you were doing. But they probably won't reflect on it the way we will as adults, right? But I would encourage you to think about the things you wish you had done differently right now. I'll give an example. I use this question on myself. What's something that I wish that I had done differently? And then I kind of discovered like it's not too late to still do those things. That's my encouragement here, is you can change and shift midstream without even really telling people. But my example would be, I have one in the middle who doesn't have as many needs and has loved a ball from the time he was a baby. That is his love language, is a ball. And that is not the love language of my others. And it occurred to me just this week to capitalize on the theme of Fred and bring it even down to like a more basic level. Ours isn't maybe skiing trip because we can't do that, but I realized he's never been to a baseball game, he's never been to a football game, he's never been to a basketball game because we can't do those venues with ease. Now we're getting to the place where we can, but I think I look back and think, why didn't I just ask people to take him to the game instead of thinking of it as something that we couldn't do? So parents, it's okay to reflect back and say, what I wish I had done differently. And it's still not too late for me to say, someone take him to the baseball game. So that would be my encouragement. It's never too late to reflect on those things. Ladies, do y'all have anything to add there before I go to the young adult years?
I have one thing. I think just be aware of the words that are spoken. And so, as siblings, we overhear a lot. So we might hear about life expectancy. We might hear we might hold those little fears in. I have a very different story. We grew up kind of in a charismatic church, and a prophet told my parents that my brother John would be healed by the time he was 18. And my little brother James heard that. I heard it. I was older. I was like, God is able, but I'm not expecting that. That would be out of God's normative way of moving today. But my 8-year-old brother, he hears that and doesn't hear necessarily any follow-up. And so I just found out this week as I was talking with James that on my brother's 18th birthday, he had been dreaming about John's going to be healed and I'm going to teach him how to talk and I'm going to teach him how to do big brother things. And then on his 18th birthday, my brother and I, James and I were out, and my dad picks us up from the airport because we've gone to visit grandparents. And my dad says, I have a surprise for you. And of course, James is like, John is healed. But the surprise was they'd gotten a cat. And that was hard. And James had to come face to face with those hard questions. Is God who he says he is? Is he able? What do you do when somebody says, thus saith the Lord? So I think one thing that parents might just need to do is be aware of the conversations around the family, in the community, and address what their children may be overhearing so that they can help them filter.
So good. And I think, we're talking about the teenage years, a lot of times it depends on how verbal and out loud processing your teens are, but those things could be just internalized. They could be heard and just kind of, that's not what we believe, I know, but it just kind of goes down and plants those seeds. And without, as even Sarah said, that's the place where you're starting to figure out what you really understand about a biblical view of disability and heaven and all of these, important themes. So, not that I'm saying, poke and nudge, but sometimes I think just nudge and see if there are things that are heavy on their heart that they're not just going to open up and talk about. You all know this, but the, drive time late at night, driving in the car when everybody's facing the same direction is a great time. And teenagers talk at bedtime when we're tired. So that's a great time to nudge because they are ready to share and process life. So drink a Coke and, consider some of those things that you may not have asked about. So good, Lisa. Okay, young adult years, here we come. I think in the young adult years, it's where you're going off to college and then, dating and getting married. So I'm going to ask them each a different question here. So Sarah, I'm going to start with you. As you went off to college, how did your relationship with your sibling change?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is in-person time is huge for Caroline. And so finding that time together really, just day to day was a lot harder. I went to college a few hours away from home. And so that, afternoon time, daily time that we had was, was gone. And so figuring out ways to spend time together became really crucial. As I wasn't necessarily thinking about it in those terms then, but as I look back now, I appreciate the efforts my parents made to help us stay connected. And Caroline even came and spent the night at the sorority house with me one night with my roommate. Was wonderful. And, just fun things like that were things that, any sisters might have done together, going out for ice cream when I was home and just things that we could do to spend one-on-one time together really became opportunities for us to reconnect and kind of reestablish those relationships as, each time we were back together.
And I know this is general terms. You said earlier, Caroline doesn't always have all the words for things,
yes.
But I think this broadly applies to a lot of our families who maybe have kids with limited language. They're still processing. They're still grieving the loss of a sibling who moves out, and the house isn't as lively and bubbly, and parents are grieving, and there's a lot of emotions there. Lots of them happy emotions, but I think never underestimate what your siblings are processing at this stage, even if they can't share it, and just the importance of that reconnecting with them when possible is such a good reminder. Okay, Fred, as you began dating and then got engaged later, how did you introduce Tim to your soon-to-be wife? And what tips would you give to other young adults who are developing relationships with significant others, and they really want that significant other to have a relationship of depth with your sibling? What tips you got?
It's a great question. That was something I always kind of was always just lingering in the back of my mind of kind of this big what if, like one day, like, how am I going to navigate this? Like, how is this all going to work out? And, for me, ultimately, it came down to, it was one of those things that, like, you really can't control. And it really depends on, candidly, like the character and quality of the other person. If they want to have a relationship with your sibling, they will. And if they don't, they won't. And you can't really change that or muscle that, and so I got really lucky just in the sense that, my wife was just very caring and just very interested in getting to know Tim and kind of understanding who he was. And so kind of introduced them in the way that you would just introduce anyone else, like, this is my brother and these are the things he likes to do, and, kind of have at it, and so I guess the short answer is it was something that I was always very concerned about, but in reality, it really wasn't as big of a deal as I had kind of built it up to be. And so maybe there are other families or siblings that will kind of have a similar experience in the future.
And I think even on the reverse, I didn't ask you this, so I'll do big picture and you can give thoughts if you have them. But even on the reverse, I've heard parents say they worry about the sibling with a disability loving the ones that marry in. That's a big change because they're sharing you with someone else. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts there, or if it's just also same thing. You can't control that. You just kind of have to step back and watch and let God do his work. But do you have any thoughts on, like, for Tim getting to know?
Yeah, I mean, Tim was always just very, interested in getting to know other people. So he was very accepting and excited. But I think it really is one of those things that you have to just kind of pray about and let go, because you really can't control it. And so it's definitely an act of faith, but it's that doesn't make it not challenging, but I think it's something you just have to kind of let go of.
And if we had time and we were going around, all of these panelists have very similar stories. That's why I'm doing one question per person here. But I think what's neat to watch is how God prepares the spouses in all of these panelists. And that's a unique role too. So Lisa, next question here comes to getting married. So as you thought about getting married, at what point did you and your now husband have conversations about your brother and maybe your desire to care for him long term? And do you have any tips for navigating those conversations before you get married?
Yeah, it was just natural. I mean, it was just so natural. He got to know my family. He got to know, and Kevin just said he doesn't remember like a big moment. It's just he grew into the family and he's a son, and just we knew that we'd have to care for John long term. Now it's different. John is now in a nursing care facility. That was a really hard and painful transition. So caring for John doesn't mean the same as it did when he was in high school. Somebody else is tasked with the day-to-day care. But Kevin knows that I might get it. I'm the one who gets the phone call in the middle of the night if John pulls out his peg tube, he has a feeding tube, or if there's some emergency. So I sleep with the phone on by the side of the bed. And he knows that there have been many times I get up in the middle of the night to meet John at the hospital when they have taken there to replace the peg tube, which he has pulled out, because John can't speak for himself and charts don't do him justice. And so I like to be there. James will show up too. James is also a legal guardian. We're co-guardians. So James's wife, Dana, it's just something we've grown into. I think that the big thing is just being upfront and talking about it and not being afraid.
So good. I think what I often encounter in this season amongst parents is just a fear of not wanting to burden our young adults or our adult children with any kind of caregiving, because they want them to be able to have families and grow and do all the things, and all the while the siblings are often very willing, eager, and even planning and thinking that way, and maybe are more hesitant to ask you what your thoughts are. But I'm nudging again that the conversations are not bad things. And I'm gonna lean on Lisa in a minute. Our very last little segment will be kind of the caregiving side of life. But I would encourage you, it doesn't have to be one long drawn out sit down. It can be many intentional moments along the way, and it can be moments. They don't have to be hour-long conversations, but to just allow your adult siblings to grow into some of those responsibilities they probably really want to do. But to that end, I'm going to toss a question back to Fred for thoughts on, as a follow-up, what advice or encouragement would you give to young adults who may want to have a more in-depth conversation with their parents about their siblings' long-term care, but they don't know how to bring it up, they don't know what to say, or they're worried? Do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's probably just to kind of just broach the topic and bring it up, because I think parents are concerned about it being a burden, and so they probably won't initiate that conversation. And so if it is something that you want more clarity on or interested in exploring, I think the sooner you talk about it, the better. I know that, if you had asked me 10 or 15 years ago, I would have had this certain vision for like, oh, if something happens, Tim will just come live with me, right? And he'll have an apartment in a garage, above the garage or something like that, right? But today, like, that would be a horrible solution for Tim, because Tim is totally set up where he lives. He's, embedded in the community, all those kinds of things. And like, the only reason I'm really kind of like aware of that is because like we've talked about it, and so I would just say, bring it up, and bring it up in little snippets if you need to, but the sooner you talk about it, the better, because it is a long conversation and it takes years, I think, to have the whole conversation. So I would start today, because you never know how much time you actually have before you need to make that final choice.
Such good wisdom and encouragement. I can't echo that enough. I just think it's hard to bring it up. It's hard to talk about it. No one wants to think about when they're not here. But as a parent hat on, it's something, even as a young parent, that is often on my mind, just in case what does happen if something happens. And so I guess I'm trying to normalize here that this is a conversation that every family impacted by disability struggles with at some point. And why? Because we don't know what the future holds. We aren't God. And so best faith foot forward, have the conversation. It's much better to have had them and started them than to begin them when it's really, really needed and there's no foundation there. Fun question here about watching your sibling become an aunt or an uncle. Anything there that you have found delightful or have seen come out in your sibling that was different? Sarah, I'm gonna start with you.
Yeah. One special thing that we've seen with Caroline is the day center that she goes to has like a prize closet, and they can earn, $bucks to go shop in the prize closet. And she has been so sweet. And every time she's gone to shop in the prize closet, picks out something for a niece or nephew. She has 5. And the very first time she came home with a Spider-Man something, and my mom thought, oh, well, that's, kind of strange that she's not really into superheroes. And she put it on her bedside table and waited until the next time she saw our oldest nephew and gave him this little Spider-Man toy. And every single time we come home, practically, she has something set aside for this, the nieces and nephews that are coming to visit. And it's just been so neat to see her just really, babies are kind of hard. They're unpredictable and cry. But the older they get, the more she really seems to enjoy time with them. And it's just been such a sweet way to see her express that love and care for them, and getting prizes for them.
I love that story. It got the tears the first time that Sarah shared it with me. I think it's just a great example there of independence. She's getting to go shopping and plan what she wants to give, and just a great way, again, to set your adults up for independence and a chance to be an aunt. Aunts love to give things. I just think that's wonderful. Fred, what about you?
I think I was just surprised at how excited Tim was to be an uncle, right? Like, and I think I kind of underplayed in my mind how big of an event this was going to be for him, and so it's been fun just to see kind of his enthusiasm and his excitement. And it's been especially fun, even just these last couple months. My daughter's just old enough now that, she can say his name and knows who he is and can kind of like look forward to seeing him. And so that's just been a fun development, and definitely something that I wasn't expecting, but it's definitely turned out to be like an extra, just a blessing that, kind of blindsided me a little bit. So it's been fun to see.
So good. And Lisa, I know with your brother it's a little different, so I'm going to ask you thoughts on watching your children get to know your brother.
Yeah, it's like double the joy, because watching my children grow in compassion and being comfortable with somebody that's so unique that it can be off-putting for people to see a man who functions so low, in such a low estate, but to see them learn to have compassion, to go and my nieces and nephews, I'll add in here too, just to watch them learn to love John. It's like this double joy, because I'm excited to see it develop in that generation. And I'm excited for my brother to have his world larger and to have more people that love him. It's really hard to articulate how beautiful it is. But my youngest daughter in particular, just because there's a gap between her and my older three, she was more of my tag along. So she went with me on a 1-on-1, just the two of us, to go visit John. And so she's really developed a sweet relationship with him. And she said, I can't wait till COVID is over and I can go see him again. And the way she holds his hand and just says scripture to him, and it's just so sweet. It's just really dear.
I love that. And this last section is going to be lightning round on Lisa. I have a couple of questions here to ask her about caring in the adult years. So Lisa, first question here is, what encouragement would you give to parents who really are trying to plan for the long-term care of their child, and just navigating those conversations?
First of all, you don't have to have the answers. You can have one little part. Okay, let's talk about this. What are you thinking about this section? What about care? What about finances? Just do one little section, and also know that you might have a plan that changes, and that's okay. But it's so much easier to have talked about it, have some idea, even if it has to change, just to have that conversation, put a few things down on paper. And I would say, like, things like guardianship and that kind of thing, the earlier that you can do it, like once your kids are established. But you want to do it, like my daddy ended up having Alzheimer's. And I am so thankful that we got some of this paperwork done before he really started to slip. We didn't know that was going to happen. So I'm really glad that was taken care of, that guardianship, legal, just because my mom was then, who had been a caregiver all those years for my little brother, now she was a caregiver for her husband, and she didn't have to process that at that time.
I love that. What about telling folks, just in general, what if the last 10 years or so looked like in terms of caring for your brother?
Well, I'll tell you, we talk about the parent guilt. We've mentioned that. Because my brother, I could just leave him at the nursing home and never go see him. He's taken care of. And my life is full. And sometimes much longer will go by that, a month, 2 months, 3 months, and I haven't gone to see him. And I'm like, oh, what kind of witness am I to the nursing home? What does John think? Does he know? Can he miss me? And just, and you just have to put those kind of things aside, and you do what God calls you to do. And if at the time my children needed that and John was well cared for, I can trust God to provide for John. So you have to make sure. Guilt, the Lord may convict, but he doesn't bring guilt, and so you have to determine, am I feeling conviction that I'm not following through with what God would have for me? Or am I feeling guilt because I'm not measuring up to what other people might expect? So that's just been, how often do I go see John? How does it fit in to my everyday plan? And then also it's been interesting. I mentioned his peg tube that comes out from time to time because he doesn't mean to pull it out. He'll just somehow get it, or sometimes it's not in right. Anyway, we'll go through times it'll be in and stay fine for months, and then 3 days in a row it'll come out. And this last round during COVID, when hospitalizations, they didn't want extra people at the hospital, the nursing home started saying to me, should we put his peg tube back in if it comes out? Maybe John doesn't really need it. I'm like, no, people need to eat. You need to feed my brother. The peg tube goes back in. And that just caught me off guard, that I would ever have to advocate for him to be fed. So that's been part of the dynamic, and, to really push to say his life is of value. And it's one thing, heroic measures are one thing, but feeding somebody, that's what we do. We take care of each other. So those have been some interesting dynamics. And then that was all happening right after my daddy died. And how much do I share with mom? I want to protect her, but I don't want to dishonor her by not having her involved in these conversations. So that's, they call us the sandwich generation. Those were some of the things I was dealing with too, like caring for my mama in her grief and wanting to protect her and yet let her have input. So that's it in a nutshell.
When Lisa shared some of this in the planning, I said there could be a whole nother roundtable just on that conversation. The hard things. I think that I'm skipping to the hard thing question as a follow-up, and I'll come back to my other one, but just any other hard parts about caregiving that come to mind, or anything that you wish people knew about caregiving that maybe they don't. You gave some good illustrations, but anything else?
I don't want to be my brother's whole world. Now, COVID is different. Nobody can go visit anybody. We're still limited in visits. But when I go to the nursing home and we have a guest book for him, and I see that somebody from my church has gone to visit him, and they'll jot down, read to him part of Psalm 119. I can't tell you what that does for me, because I want him to have as big a world as he can. I want him to be known as part of the body of Christ. He's a covenant member of the covenant community, and I want him to be known, and I want him as much as he can to know people. So it's hard when people, because he can't come to church, because he can't do those things, don't consider his spiritual needs as well. And it's a huge blessing when they do.
I think there's an encouragement on the ministry level for what does it look like, again, another topic, but what does it look like to engage disability and to continue discipleship and, spiritual encouragement in these nursing home and or any other, especially this last year. I just think closed settings where visits haven't been able to take place as regularly. How do we keep them attached to the body of Christ. And I would just encourage anyone out there with those questions. Again, this is why we're here. We can't answer everything in one conversation, but it's so important to stay connected to the body of Christ. And that's our encouragement. We got to make it happen. We just have to figure out what it looks like. All right, Lisa, last question. If we know of a sibling who's a primary caregiver or in a supportive role, what's the best way that we, the body of Christ, can encourage that caregiving sibling?
Ask what's hard, what's rewarding, how can we come alongside of you? And don't let them just say, oh, it's fine. Say, well, this is a unique role. Tell me more. You're talking about poke them a little bit. Some people need that poking. You can probably tell I don't need too much poking. I just talk, but some people need a little more poking. And also be, like I was saying about, I don't want to be John's whole world. I think most people feel that they want their siblings to have a big world that doesn't revolve around them. So see how you can come into the siblings world too, and be just one more friend, one more voice, one more proclamation of the gospel in that sibling's life.
Great encouragement. I think, again, just to reiterate the themes of love well. So whether you are loving the sibling and you're going to visit, or whether you are loving the caregiver, both are so important and both are so needed. And just as a way of closing this out tonight, there was so much good conversation that we didn't want to cut any of it. And we wanted to give you kind of the full spectrum of all the seasons. That being said, we know we haven't answered all the questions. We know we've covered a lot of ground, and I am going to make sure that all of the questions that have been asked, that you've been gotten some live tonight, will be answered. I will come back to you. I see your questions, and they're super important to all of us, and we will get answers to you. But to these panelists, I'm just so thankful that you'll share your lives and your stories and give some encouragement and perspective to parents and some of our siblings that are watching tonight too. So thanks so much to all three of you for everything you've said and all that you've done to get ready for sharing this, and then just also for loving your siblings well and for being willing to use that story for God's people. So thank you so much, and thanks to everybody who joined us. Look forward to seeing you at our next webcast, which is the last Thursday in August, and we will be talking to pastor dads about what is it like to be a pastor and have a sibling or have a child with a disability, not sibling. I have to get a new thing. What is it like to be a pastor and have a child with a disability? So we hope you'll join us. And thank you for attending tonight. We are so glad you've been with us.